Try this again. This is Biology 2401, Organization of the Nervous System, second little part right here. And what we're going to do is take the information that we had on the previous one and try to look at it yet another way. For example, if we were looking at a model of the brain, we might see something has a general pattern like this right here. However, it's sometimes more convenient to do things in a kind of a schematic way, so we might be able to see the organization just a little simpler, and then of course we can start labeling the parts inside. Now this of course is a schematic, therefore it's not anatomically correct, but it does represent the general organization of the brain, the spinal cord, the general structures we're going to be talking about. But we're going to take it one step farther. That is, we're going to look at the functional organization, not the anatomical organization. And so we have on the previous little blurb video talked about how we can see the central nervous system as a prisoner of the peripheral nervous system. We saw the afferent or input going to the central nervous system, the efferent or output coming away from the central nervous system, and the peripheral nervous system being in charge of that. Well, we also saw that as a kind of a dichotomous key right here, in which the entire nervous system is divided into the central and the peripheral. The central is divided into the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral is divided into the afferent and the efferent, input and output. The afferent is divided into the somatic and the visceral. The efferent is divided into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, which is equivalent to the visceral. And then the autonomic nervous system can be subdivided yet again as the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Now, each one of these diagrams has something about it that's kind of useful, but here's one that I put together, and I think it might show just one more dimension to it all. What I got here is kind of a bow tie effect right here. And this represents input on this side, this is processing, this is output, and these are the targets of that output right there. So this would represent the central nervous system. This right here would represent the afferent division of the peripheral nervous system, the sensory or input. And this over here would represent the efferent part of the peripheral nervous system, the motor or the output. And these things over here are called the effectors. The effectors are the parts of the body that can respond to signals that are being sent from the nervous system. So let's go back over here. So we'll start off with the big and the basic. And the big and the basic right here is stimuli. A stimulus, singular, is a change in the environment. It represents some feature of your body's condition that changes. And a stimulus, again, is what your nervous system looks for. Your nervous system cannot recognize something unless it changes. So it's extremely important to recognize that a stimulus is a change in the environment. There are several really fun examples of this, which in your textbook you might be able to pick that up, or sometimes we might share it with each other. But here we go. There's a change in the environment. Now, we could be talking about the external environment of the body or the internal environment. If it is the external environment, it's coming from outside the body, and it can be recognized by what's called exteroceptors. Now, exteroceptors are just receptors that are picking up information coming from the outside of the body. If the information is coming from the inside of the body, the internal environment, we would call those interoceptors. And again, these would be things like blood pressure, volume inside your stomach, your small intestine, chemistry of your blood. Well, okay, now the exteroceptors can be divided into 5 basic groups, and those are mechanoreceptors, thermoreceptors, chemoreceptors, photoreceptors, and nociceptors. Now, each one of these receptors is responding to a different kind of a stimulus, a different kind of a change in the environment. And this down here is one way to try to see those things. For a mechanoreceptor, what you're doing is the stimulus is going to be a change in shape. That is, there's going to be compression or some kind of extension, some kind of stretch or some kind of squeeze. And that's what mechanoreceptors recognize. That's the stimulus. So this would be things such as touch or blood pressure, moving your arm and having a different amount of stretch on one side of your elbow versus the other side of the elbow. Thermoreceptors measure heat, but more specifically, they measure the transfer of heat. And they specifically measure the transfer of heat, not of cold, because there's no such thing as cold. Cold is just the absence of heat. So these things respond to the transfer of heat. If the heat is leaving your body, they might give you the impression that you're cold. If the heat is coming into your body, they may give you the impression that you're warm or the environment is warm. Much more to say about that later on. If you're measuring the presence or absence of chemicals in the environment, those would be chemoreceptors. And so therefore your sense of smell and taste are obviously due to chemoreceptors of some sort. If you're recognizing changes in light patterns, that would be photoreceptors, and the only significant examples be, of course, in the retina of the eye. And then if we're talking about extreme stimuli, stimuli that are beyond the normal range of a mechano, thermo, chemo, or photoreceptors, these are nociceptors that work with this. So a nociceptor refers to extreme changes in stress or heat or chemicals or light. And the way that nociceptors recognizes or get you to recognize this is by pain. So think of these things as pain receptors. An example would be that if you just touch something, mechanoreceptors will tell you that you're touching that. However, if something is crushing you, then mechanoreceptors can't handle that and nociceptors will kick in. If there is an extreme amount of heat moving into your body and you get a burn sensation, those are nociceptors. If you have an extreme loss of heat, such as touching a piece of dry ice, again, the thermoreceptors can't recognize that. That's not a normal range for the body, and so therefore nociceptors kick in and create pain. So with each one of these things, if you have an extreme stimulus, nociceptors may step in and tell you you're beyond the normal environment and you need to get away from that thing. So pain is an alarm. Pain is good in the sense that it tells you that you've run across a stimulus that is abnormal and perhaps very, very harmful to the body. So mechanoreceptors, thermoreceptors, chemoreceptors, photoreceptors, nociceptors. If they're looking at the outside world, they are called exteroceptors. If, however, these things are measuring things within the body, you would call them interoceptors. And so an example right here would be pressure receptors of your blood, recognizing inside changes in size and shape. Pressure receptors inside, again, your stomach, your small intestine, large intestine, rectum, recognizing the volume of material that's found inside. Thermoreceptors inside, measuring the temperature of the blood, so that your hypothalamus can decide whether you need to generate some heat or lose some heat. Chemoreceptors, again, recognizing the chemistry inside the lumen of the digestive system, or chemoreceptors recognizing the chemical composition of your blood and then alerting your central nervous system to changes and such. And of course, there's nociceptors too. A good example of a nociceptor right here would be if a person's having a heart attack, the extreme lack of oxygen on the cardiac muscle causes nociceptors to kick in and to register this with the brain, which then registers as pain. All right. So again, a quick comparison here between exteroceptors, interoceptors, between mechano, thermo, chemo, photo, and nociceptors. Notice that when it comes to interoceptors, we don't have photoreceptors down here. It's dark inside. Next thing right here, all this information that's being gathered about stimuli, changes in the environment, can be sent towards the central nervous system. But before it gets to the central nervous system, it has to pass through two general filters right here. Again, we're simplifying things dramatically. This filter right here is called the Reticular Activating System, the RAS. And the RAS, Reticular Activating System, blocks approximately 99% of the sensory information that's heading towards your brain. From the thousands and thousands and thousands of receptors that are picking up information and reporting to your spinal cord and brain, you can't focus your attention on all those things at the same time. So the reticular activating system helps select what you're going to pay attention to, what you're going to be conscious of at the moment. So again, only about 1% of the sensory information that's heading towards your brain actually gets to the conscious part of your brain. This is how you focus your attention. The limbic system has the ability to put an emotion onto that raw information that's heading towards your cerebrum. This unusual little feature right here allows you to be emotional about something such as the sound of a voice or a color or an odor. So for example, if you smell cinnamon and you think about Christmas and it gives you an emotional feeling, that was your limbic system that did that for you. If you tend to notice certain things such as cars or attractive people, again, that may be your limbic system that's kicking in there and putting an emotion onto that just plain data that's heading towards you. So much more can be said about this. It's amazing stuff. Next thing right here, let's go ahead and say that the information has gotten to your brain. It's the 1%. Let's say that you may or may not have put an emotion onto that information, and now it's inside the brain, so to speak. Now you have your sensory, associative, and motor regions of your central nervous system. Now, sensory is receiving information, not interpreting it, just receiving it. Sort of like somebody who picks up the mail but doesn't read it. The associative area is where you actually process the information, like a person who opens and reads the mail. And the motor part of the central nervous system is where signals are sent out towards the body. This is sort of like a mailman who gets a letter and delivers the letter. They didn't write it, they didn't read it, they're just getting it and delivering it. Now, of these three regions right here, it's kind of easy to remember SAM, SAM. So you have sensory, associative, and motor, and of the three, the largest part of your central nervous system, particularly your brain, is associative. These are like the bureaucrats. Information comes in uninterpreted. The bureaucrats pick up that information and give it meaning, and then send signals out through the motor part of the central nervous system. Again, these not doing anything except delivering, these not doing anything except for receiving. Now, inside the associative part of your brain, the largest regions of your brain, it comes down to the simplicity of what is memory? Well, memory is where you take names and existing patterns and you put them together. So this whole process right here of trying to find images that you can remember later on when you're studying things is working here inside the associative area of your brain. We are trying to give you some patterns and then a whole list of gosh awful names are over here. And we're hoping that you can put the two together and create memory. Again, so much more can be said about this. And if you've ever taken a general psychology course, this stuff is absolutely fascinating. And again, perception is in here too. You see something, you interpret it, you put meaning to it or not. So much can be said about this. Looking on the other side of the story right here, okay. Let's say information came to your brain, you received it, you interpreted it, and maybe you're going to send something out to your body. This information going out is called motor or output information. It's efferent information. It's part of the peripheral nervous system. It can go out through the somatic division of the efferent nervous system or the autonomic. If it goes to the somatic, it's potentially voluntary, direct conscious control over an effector, but the only effector is going to be a muscle, and specifically the skeletal muscle. So this right here is very simple, very straightforward. It's got one division right here. It's got one kind of target and one kind of that kind of a target. The autonomic nervous system, however, is kind of dominated by the number 2. This was 1. These are 2s down here. The autonomic nervous system is divided into 2 divisions, sympathetic and parasympathetic. It sends its signals out to 2 kinds of effectors, muscles and glands. There are 2 kinds of muscles involved here, smooth and cardiac, and 2 kinds of glands, endocrine and exocrine. You can see immediately that the autonomic nervous system has a wider range of control than the somatic nervous system does. This again is happening unconsciously all the time. It keeps you running as a machine. It's the autopilot. This right here is where you step in periodically and try to move the machine around in different directions. Down here, when we talk about the sympathetic nervous system, we mentioned that it uses a lot of energy. The parasympathetic tends to save or gather energy. The sympathetic nervous system is called the fight or flight system. The parasympathetic is called the rest and digest. They both send signals to smooth and cardiac muscle and to endocrine and exocrine glands. So this is going to be something called dual innervation, which we'll talk about later on. And it does represent involuntary control. You do not have direct conscious control over these parts of your body right here. Now, in just a moment, we'll start this thing all over again and make some quick comparisons between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system using these strange little mnemonic devices down here to perhaps make the names and patterns plug in together a little bit better.